My name is Jessica Schneider. Today is January 11th, 2023, and I'm recording the oral history of Les Norton. Hi Les, how are you today?
Great, thank you for having me.
Wonderful, let's get started. What is your full name, Les? Why did your parents select that name for you? And do you have a nickname?
Well, my birth name was Leslie Michael Norton. I was named after my grandfather, Laser or Eliezer, and I really, most of my life, gone by the name of Les as opposed to Leslie. But again, I was named after my grandfather.
Wonderful. When and where were you born, Les?
I was born in Laredo, Texas, all the way in South Texas.
What was it like growing up in Laredo?
Life in Laredo, especially growing up, was great back in the, growing up in the 50s and early 60s. And to me, one of the standout memories was the fact that growing up in a community that was probably 90% Hispanic, at the most maybe 100 to 120 Jewish families. Yet growing up in Laredo, I look back at those years and fondly remember the fact that I was never really exposed to any sort of anti-Semitism, prejudice. As a matter of fact, the first time I was ever exposed to any sort of prejudice was when I was a freshman at the University of Texas in Austin. I was obviously much younger, somewhat dark complected, curly hair, and people used to mistake me for being Mexican. And I was prejudiced because of the fact that they thought I was Mexican. And here I would have thought it's because I was Jewish and I was out in the real world.
Wow. How did your family come to Laredo?
Well, interesting story. My father was born and raised in a small village in Poland, in eastern Poland, about three and a half hours east of Warsaw. And he grew up in a family with his parents, a sister, a younger brother. And in the late 1920s, early 30s, he was about to be drafted into the Polish army. And his parents, my grandparents, didn't really want to subject him to the terrible conditions that existed during that time period in the Polish army. And add to that, if you were Jewish, it was even worse. So the idea was that he was going to wind up at a destination, spend several years working, accumulating money, that he was going to be sent back to bring out his whole family, my family, which was his parents, sister, aunt and uncles and cousins. 1939 rolls around and they were all victims of the Holocaust.
Oh, that's devastating. You brought with you today a letter. Would you like to tell us that story?
Several years ago, my uncle, my father's younger brother, had passed away. And my first cousin, Larry, comes in one day to my father's store where I worked, and he had a postcard that he had found in cleaning out his father's drawers. And the postcard was written in Yiddish, so obviously we couldn't read it, and it came from his sister in Poland. We handed the letter to my father, who could fluently read Yiddish, and we went to the back of the store just to talk. An employee of ours approached me and said, "Come quick, your father is crying, your father is crying." So we immediately rushed to my father. He was sitting in a chair, profusely crying. And all he kept saying is, "You shouldn't read the letter, you shouldn't read the letter." We said, "We won't read it." We took the letter away. My cousin sent it to his son, who at the time was attending university in Washington, and he had the letter translated. This is the copy of the front of the postcard. Letter was written in Yiddish, and basically, the letter was written on August the 24th, 1939, basically exactly a week before the Nazis invaded Poland, which started World War I. And the letter was basically a sister writing a letter to her brother, my father, and to paraphrase the letter, she's telling my father how bad conditions are in the village, that they're running out of food, they have very little electricity during the day, and she specifically mentions in the letter to my father, do remember Moishe the tailor, remember Laser the this, and they were all taken away, and they didn't know at the time why they were being taken away. Well, obviously, we know now why they were being taken away. So this letter, this postcard has a place, deep in the heart of my entire family.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to circle back around to talk about your childhood, and then we'll sort of scale
Sure.
back to adulthood. What is your earliest childhood memory of Judaism or Jewishness in your household?
Well, my father, again, coming from Poland, was a very observant Orthodox Jew. My mother came from a small community north of Chicago, and she was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family. So I grew up with all the traditions, the customs, the foods, and our synagogue in Laredo for many, many years, which is still operational, was a conservative synagogue, leaning a little bit more towards the Orthodox side. So my earliest recollection was going every Friday with my father to services. And I remember growing up, there was no such thing as going to high school football games on Friday, going out on dates on Friday night. That was the night you attended Shabbat services with my father.
What a lovely memory. Describe the personalities of your family members growing up.
Oh boy. My father basically had no formal education. He maybe 5th or 6th grade, yet he eventually developed, along with his brother Sam, they developed a very large and successful retail business, operating several stores in Laredo and McAllen, Texas. And I always took a lot of pride in the fact that he never had any formal education, probably never operated a computer in his life, yet I always thought was one of the smartest businessmen that I ever came across. And my fondest recollection of him was his humor and his devotion to the synagogue, which he later in life became president of, and he was very dedicated to all his employees that had a store for almost 70 years. My mother was born and raised in Chicago, and my mother was very, very, how would I say, straight-laced, straight-arrowed, and she placed a big emphasis on my brother and myself, education. If you made an A minus, her first reaction would be, why wasn't it an A plus? And one of the earliest memories I have of my mother was the fact that on her side, she was related to Jack Benny, the comedian. And I remember growing up when Jack Benny was still alive on television, and if I would make a big thing about, do you know who my cousin is? Jack Benny is my cousin. My mother would get furious at me, because to her it was just her cousin Jack, who she grew up with in Illinois. So it was a very distinct difference between my father and his personality and my mother with her personality, but they both led a life basically rooted in their Judaism.
Tell us about your siblings.
My siblings, I have a younger brother, my only sibling. Name is Robert. He still lives in Laredo, and we had a very good, fun childhood growing up.
That's lovely. What took you to Austin for college?
At an early age, I was always a big University of Texas football fan, and as I got older teenager, in my mind there was never a doubt that's the only university I was going to consider. And again, it was my love for the football team, my love for the university, so I never really entertained going anywhere else.
What did you study?
I majored in marketing, graduated with a BBA in marketing and business.
How have you utilized that in your professional life?
Well, in 1971, I graduate from the University of Texas. I get married, still happily married to my wife, Joyce. And upon getting married, I went immediately into the family business. At the time, my family operated numerous stores in Laredo and McAllen. So I basically spent the majority of my adult life in the retail business along with my father and my uncle.
So you moved back to Laredo after college?
I moved back to Laredo after I got married, convinced my Dallas born and raised wife that Laredo was a great place to live and raise children. And we lived there up until about 6-7 years ago when I basically retired and moved to Dallas.
Lovely. Tell me how you met Joyce.
How did I meet Joyce? Do I come up? I was living in the fraternity house. I was an AE Pi. When I had come down with the flu, I had a bad case of the flu. I was in my room at the fraternity house, and a dear friend of mine, Mark Becker, who is still a close friend of mine, comes in and says, "Come on, we're going to the DeFi sorority. They're having an open house. I want you to meet somebody." And I kept telling him, "You're out of your mind. I haven't shaved for now." Fast forward the story, he gets me out of bed, clean up. We walk over to the sorority house. By that time, I'm dying of thirst. And the first thing I said, before you introduce me to anybody, I've got to get something to drink. And they took me over, pointed me out where the punch was. And the person serving punch was my wife, Joyce. And from there, she couldn't get enough of me.
What a lovely story. So you all have been married for quite a long time. Do you have any children?
Yes, we do. I have 2 children. I have an older son, Jacob, who is about to turn 50. He is a tennis pro here in Dallas at the Glen Eagles Country Club. My daughter, Michelle, our daughter, Michelle, is 40, will be 47. She is a practicing attorney here in Dallas she and her husband, Craig, have 2 children, our only 2 grandchildren. And that's one of the main reasons why we moved to Dallas.
That's lovely. Let's see. Were there any fads in your youth? Any fads, popular hairstyles or fashions in your youth or college years that you remember very clearly or that you identified with?
Actually, my earliest recollection was being a big fan in the 1950s of the Walt Disney Davy Crockett show that was on every week. And I remember me and my friends, everybody had to have a coonskin cap as, a young kid, and everybody had to play act like Davy Crockett. And from that, I guess, we arrived at the early 1960s, and the Beatles became the big fad, and everybody wanted to have their hair cut like the Beatles. And I remember that was one of the most devastating moments in my life when I realized my hair was very curly and kinky, and I couldn't get the Beatles cut where all my other friends were getting it. So that was always a devastating part of my life.
How were holidays, birthdays, holy days, etc., celebrated in your life growing up and in your adult life?
Growing up, holidays were very, very important. My mother, for a college graduation gift, was gifted with a 16-millimeter movie camera. And that was a camera that was used for every birthday that I had, every birthday that my brother had. And birthdays in Laredo were always something special because you had to make it special, because back in those days in a city like Laredo, we didn't have all the fast food stores and all the amenities that are offered in bigger cities. So birthdays were always very, very special. High holidays were very, very special, especially in my parents' house because they had the closest home to our synagogue. So whenever we had over the years visiting rabbis or visiting cannors, or visiting Jewish dignitaries, they always stayed at my parents' house. So the holidays, I grew up with the visiting cannors staying at our house, visiting rabbis staying at our house, and then I remember walking with them and my father to the synagogue, and it was always very interesting conversations to have with a visiting cantor, a visiting rabbi. So Jewish holidays were always looked forward to, and were always celebrated in a very, very fun and festive way.
That's great. Did you carry those traditions over in your adult life?
I want to say yes, I did. My wife ever since we got married, was very, very important part of our family life. She made sure, our children were bar and bat mitzvahed, attended Sunday school, Hebrew school. Religion was always a very important factor. And growing up here in Dallas, I had the privilege, I guess, and honor of meeting her rabbi, who's Rabbi Gerald Klein for Temple Emmanuel. And he married Joyce and myself. He came to Laredo and bar and bat mitzvahed our children. And he always had a special place, in my family's heart.
Who is the oldest relative you remember as a child?
The oldest relative I can remember, I would probably say would be my mother's aunt who lived in Chicago. And the other one I would say, also very interesting story, was my cousin Seymour, who we always refer to as Shikey. Cousin Shikey was he was a prisoner in Auschwitz for many years. He survived 4 or 5 different concentration camps. And in the middle 1950s, my father and uncle brought him over to Laredo and basically took care of him, put him in business. And I grew up, got to be very close with Shikey and heard numerous stories about what he remembered about being in the Holocaust and what it was like in the camps. And that was always, I guess, the starting point where I developed my interest in the Holocaust, which has led to all my current activities.
Let's, pardon me, let's touch upon that. You mentioned you're a docent at the Holocaust Center. What drove you to start doing that?
Well, again, because of all the years I spent growing up with my cousin Shikey, having an interest in the Holocaust. When my wife and I first arrived in Dallas, we decided we wanted to audit some courses at some of the universities here. So it just so happened the first course that we audited was at the University of Texas, Dallas, and we audited a graduate course on the Holocaust that was taught by a very renowned, well-known professor at UTD, Professor Susanna Oshvath. And that was a fascinating experience. And while I was taking the course, I heard about becoming a docent at the Holocaust Museum. And I applied, was accepted, went to the training program, and I've been an active docent there for close to 6 years now. And through my involvement at the Holocaust Museum, I became very close friends with Professor Rick Halpern at SMU University, the head of the Human Rights Department. And I've taken numerous courses that he's taught on the Holocaust. And 4 years ago, I went with him on his annual Holocaust Poland tour, 2-week tour of Poland.
Very fun. Have you volunteered or been active with any other organizations or synagogues or anything in Dallas or even when you were in Laredo?
Well, in Laredo, I was very active with the synagogue there. I was president for over 10 years. My wife and I were very involved with helping my mother with the Israel Bond Drive. The Israel Bond Drive in Laredo was chaired for almost 50 years by my mother. So as a result, I had access or attended many Israel Bond dinners and met everybody from Wolf Blitzer to comedian George Jessel. So I always had quite an interesting involvement with Israel Bonds in Israel. Aside from that, when I came to Dallas, my wife and I became immediate members of Temple Emmanuel, and through that met many friends who remain very close friends of ours, and through our friendship, we've been members of a Shema group, Havarah group here in Dallas, excuse me, for many years. So that is also a fascinating and interesting point in our daily life.
Absolutely. Circling back around, What do you admire most about your wife?
What do I admire most about my wife? Let's see, do we have a half an hour? An hour?
All of the time.
No. No, I guess it's just basically the fact that we share so much in common, and the things that we don't share in common, she doesn't get mad at me and I don't get mad at her. I've always admired the way she raised our children. Like I said, my daughter is an attorney. My son is a very successful tennis pro, and all that I think is attributed to my wife and her taking care of the kids during a time when business was very good and booming in Laredo, so she had obviously the time to raise the kids during the daylight hours when I was busy working, and basically it's her interest and devotion to education and passing that along to our children.
What do you believe is the key to a successful marriage?
The key to a successful marriage? Basically respecting each other's likes and dislikes, and knowing that there's something that you don't like, that's just part of life. Not everything's going to be, to your liking, but we have a mutual interest in everything from concerts to movies. So we're very avid moviegoers, concert goers, and that's always been a highlight of our day-to-day activities, is being able to enjoy each other's interest in movies and concerts and such.
How did you find out you were going to be a parent for the first time?
Now that is a good question. I would actually have to ask, I really don't remember, other than the fact that, was anxious for the baby to arrive. And I always had, actually something I learned through my father, never found out before Joyce gave birth what the child was. So when she did give birth, that was the first time that we knew the sex of the child, and we're obviously very, very excited.
How did you pick your children's names?
Jacob was our firstborn, our son. Jacob was my maternal grandfather, and Michelle, my daughter, was named after basically my mother. Wait, can we stop just for a second? Wait, let me.
Where do you attend temple here in Dallas?
In Dallas, my wife and I, along with my daughter, son-in-law, and grandkids, and son, attend Temple Emmanuel, where my wife grew up. She grew up in Temple Emmanuel. She was confirmed at Temple Emmanuel, and as I had mentioned previously, it was Rabbi Gerald Klein who married us, came to Laredo on 2 different occasions to bar and bat mitzvah, my children. And so Temple Emmanuel has always had a special place in my wife's heart, a special place in my heart, and very proud of our daughter, Michelle, who was very, very active. She was on the executive board director for Temple for several years, was vice president, still very involved with Temple, very involved with the school system here. So we're very, very proud of the role that she has taken at Temple.
Tell me about Michelle's children, your grandchildren.
2 grandchildren, the oldest being 14 years old, name is Noah Riley Whitman. Our granddaughter is Ava Greer Whitman, age 11. Noah, a year ago, had his bar mitzvah here in Temple Emmanuel, and that was quite a memorable experience, and we're looking forward in a couple of years to the bat mitzvah of Ava. And they're both very, very good students. They're very active they attend Parish Episcopal School. Noah is a very, very accomplished tennis player, competitive tennis player, travels all over the country. He's nationally ranked, so we're proud of that. Ava is a very, very accomplished volleyball player, very good. Plus she's a very, very accomplished artist, in fact, an amazing artist. So between the 2 of them, they make life interesting. Our oldest son, our firstborn Jacob, was named after my grandfather, who was a victim of the Holocaust. Jacob's middle name is Herschel, who was named after Joyce's uncle. And Michelle, our daughter, basically we just like the name, Michelle, I guess being big fans of the Beatles and the song Michelle, but her middle name, Beth, was named after my uncle, my mother's brother, who had just passed away a few months before Michelle was born.
That's lovely. What was your proudest moment as a parent?
My proudest moment I would say basically sitting in the congregation watching my son get bar mitzvahed and my daughter get bat mitzvahed.
Tell me about your parents' courtship.
My parents' courtship. When my mother graduated from college, University of Illinois, as a graduation gift, her aunt and uncle invited her to go with them to Monterrey, Mexico, where they had a very good friend of theirs, a Jewish gentleman living in Monterrey. When they arrived in Monterrey, this friend of theirs says, "Oh, I've got a very good friend of mine that I've become friends with, a single Jewish fella." Turned out it was my father. My father at the time didn't speak English. My mother didn't really speak Spanish, and they conversed in Yiddish. And from the first meeting, they basically corresponded, because my mother was living in Illinois, my father was living in Mexico, and they basically courted each other for 10 years until they got married.
That is lovely. If you could have had any other profession, what would it have been? And why wasn't it your first choice?
What other profession would I have had? Probably, I would say, a news anchor, which I did for 4 years. When they opened up a new TV station in Laredo, an ABC affiliate, they asked me to be the sports director, sports announcer, and I just got the bug I love being, in front of the camera, and as a result of that, just one of the many activities I got involved with was, along with two of my closest friends, we hosted the Jerry Lewis Labor Day Telethon, the local portion, for close to 25 years in Laredo. We were the on-air celebrities when they would cut to the local stations.
Wow. What accomplishments in your life are you most proud of?
I would say the accomplishment that I was most proud of was when I was in high school, I was nominated and won the State Liberty Bell Award, which is an award given by the State Bar of Texas. And I remember attending a banquet here, and it actually was in Fort Worth, and was given the award by, at the time, Governor Mark White. That was, one of the highlights, I would say. The other thing was basically being on the trip with Dr. Halpern to Poland, and being able to fulfill a lifelong dream of my father, which was he always wanted to say Kaddish at Treblinka, where his family was all killed. And when he went to Poland about 10 years before he passed away, he just couldn't, it was too emotional for him. And I remember telling him that one day, I would eventually say Kaddish. When I was in Poland with Dr. Halpern's tour, and we were at Treblinka, I said the Kaddish there, and it was an experience I'll never forget because it was brutally cold, and when I finished, I looked up, there was 33, 35 people, adults that were on the tour, all in tears. It was quite an emotional experience.
It's very powerful. What is one thing you most want people to remember about you?
That I always, believed in first of all, that I always believed in living a good life as a Jew, and that hopefully with all the years of that my wife and I were involved with numerous charities in Laredo, that hopefully people will remember all the good work that we did, everything from 25 years with the Muscular Dystrophy Association, Juvenile Diabetes Association, Make-A-Wish Foundation. So I would just hope that people would remember me and my wife for all the positive things that we contributed to the well-being of, life in Laredo.
What advice would you like to leave for the next generation?
Best advice I would give is number one is the importance of education, and number two is the importance of communicating with your fellow man. As a aging grandfather and seeing the overuse, I think, of cell phone, for example, I'm afraid people don't talk to each other anymore. And I don't care, and I've always felt this ever since I was young, I don't care how smart you are in school, how many A's you make on your report card, if you can't go out in life and communicate with your fellow man, you're going to be lost. So I've always placed a big emphasis on my kids, on my grandkids, that take as many speech courses as you can in addition to all your other educational endeavors. Because again, if you can't communicate with your fellow man, you're at a big disadvantage.
Is there anything you would like to include in this interview that we haven't touched upon?
I made reference earlier to my paternal family in Poland. I would like to show this is a picture of my family. This person that I'm pointing here, that's my father. That is my Uncle Sam and my grandparents, great-grandmother, and they were all victims of the Holocaust. And it is their memory that has driven me basically to get involved with the Holocaust Museum, taking numerous courses at different universities, voracious reader of Holocaust-related books, thanks to Dr. Halpern at SMU. But I think, it's so important that we should never forget, what happened. And even if you're an individual who didn't have family like I did, that you remember losing in the Holocaust, it's important to keep the stories and the importance of remembering the Holocaust. So I hope to be a docent at the museum for many years to come. I hope to continue reading, learning, because you never stop learning about the Holocaust. And finally, it's always been on my bucket list, my fondest dream in life would be to go back to Poland with Dr. Halpern on his tour with my grandson when he graduates from high school, and hopefully to continue the memory of his family for generations to come.
Thank you very much, Les.
Thank you.